Hello and welcome to Shred Show. I am your host Chris Grow, and this is your weekly dose of surfboard porno where I fondle fiberglass and you get off on it from the comfort of your home computer. How many subscribers do you think that just lost us? Today we've got two fours, the utility dimensions and the groveler. Today we'll start by defining groveler. To grovel is to beg, and when you're groveling on a surfboard, you're begging the ocean to let you surf in a high performance way on a day where the ocean really isn't giving you that much help. You may want to blow out the fins or do tight turns out on the shoulder, but the waves are small and they're really not helping you out that much. There are two main traits that distinguish a groveler from two other surfboards that you may be used to. First, a groveler is different than a standard shortboard because a groveler is about 2 to 4 inches shorter and it has a little bit more volume. Why? Because we need that volume to help us plane down the line and get speed when the waves are small, and we need to shorten up the rail line a little bit so that it can fit on the face of a smaller wave. Second, a groveler surfboard is different from a fish because a groveler has more tail rocker. Why is that? Because we need that tail rocker to fit into tight arcing turns and to be able to blow the fins out in the lip. On a fish with less curve in the tail rocker, our goal isn't usually high performance surfing, but instead just planing and cruising easily. Now number 4 has more rocker than the Weirdo Ripper, the Neckbeard, or the new Flyer, and out of all 4 concept boards that Dane Reynolds got last year, this one had the most rocker. That's why number 4 came to market instead of 1, 2, or 3, because those concept boards all had less rocker than this. Now you may find it interesting that Dane Reynolds chose the most rockered out version of all 4 concept boards because the initial goal of creating this board was for performance surfing in small waves. To me, this means that the outline, bottom contours, and volume distribution of this board do a really good job of planing in small waves and give us the right to buy a lot of rocker where we would normally need less rocker to plane and move forward on the face of a small wave. One of the most noticeable things on the outline of number 4 are these bumps back here, and in this case bump is not just another word for wing. If we were to look at the wings on the Weirdo Ripper, for example, we would see the outline of the rail coming across this way, and then we'd have a very sharp 90-degree angle cut in the outline of the board. In the case of number 4, we just have these sloping, gentle, quick bumps back here, and those don't have the purpose of giving us release points for tighter pivot. They instead have the purpose of straightening out the rail across here, here, and here to give us more drive and forward projection. We know this for 3 reasons. First, wings are commonly used to give us quicker snaps and tighter pivot on the face of a wave because of how water wants to release off of a straight edge in a wing. But in the case of 4, these bumps have curve to them, and since water wants to flow around a curve more than it wants to release, we know that these bumps are not created with the goal of releasing a ton of water. Second is this wing's relationship to our back foot, because as a wing placement moves forward towards the center of the board in the outline, it creates more of a fulcrum between our front and back foot that we can use as a pivot point on the wave. But this leading wing here on 4 is placed all the way back at our back foot. Thirdly and finally is this wing's placement relative to the leading 2 fins in the thruster. Because as a wing placement moves closer to the trailing edge of the fin, it works more with that fin to create a release point for water, adding to the pivot that the board can get away with. But in the case of 4, this wing placement is placed far behind the trailing edge of the leading fins. This all amounts to a board with much more drive than we would normally associate on a board with wings because of how far back the wings are relative to the center of the board and the trailing edge of the fin, and because of a lack of any sort of a straight edge or a 90-degree angle in the bumps. Finally, the leading bumps right here are placed as far back into the tail as possible, helping us to keep as much width and planing surface on the bottom of the board as we can to help this board work in flat spots on Huntington Beach waves or anywhere else that you're typically groveling. Looking at the concaves on number 4, begins with a flat in the nose, single concave, definitely a moderate single concave, nothing really crazy. And then with about a third left in the board, we start to notice the emergence of V, double concave through the thruster, finishing off with V in the back. Now let's talk about V for a second. We know what a V-bottom is. A V is when the shape of the board from here to here to here looks like a V. And the way that that manifests is this part of the board at the end of the stringer comes down more than the rails. What that does is it creates a little bit of an imbalance where the board wants to rock from rail to rail because of the way that it's primarily floating here on the bottom of the stringer where it goes down the furthest. But what that doesn't do is it doesn't really help us with lift like a single concave would. Many surfers like Tom Curran would say that they really like a single concave which is where the board dips from this rail down to the stringer and then dips back up to the rail, because of the way that that gives them constant speed and lift moving forward when they're trying to make it out of barrels. But in the case of groveling, we're not really trying to make it out of barrels by riding the foam ball of a really good wave. Instead, we just want to be able to get rail to rail and maneuver the board when we have minimal help with forward momentum and speed to help us get into turns from really small waves. Thus, the use of a V-bottom in a board like this for groveling as opposed to a single concave. The dimensions of this board are 5'11" by 20 3/8 by 2 5/8, and the dimensions of this board 6'1" by 20 by 2 5/8. This board also has 34.3 liters of volume, which is about 0.4 more liters than the Groveler. You'll generally find that most surfers will surf the utility dimensions about 2 inches longer than the Groveler dimensions, with a little bit less width from rail to rail at the wide point, and an ever so slightly thinned out foil through the rail's tail and nose. That's because the utility dimensions of this board are not designed for groveling like the board we just talked about. They're instead designed for good waves in parts of the world that don't get quite as good as Hawaii, Indonesia, or a really good French beach break. Instead, this board is designed around good waves in places like California that don't get quite as good as other parts of the world. In spite of the similarity in design, I don't think of this board as a groveler, but instead a fun board for good waves that aren't really powerful and aren't barreling. Now, if one day you were to find yourself visited by the ghost of surfboards past and he was going to grant you 2 surfboards, whatever you wanted, you may find it fun to have the utility dimensions and the groveler dimensions of number 4. That's because they're essentially the same board. One of them is just refined for smaller waves, while the other one is refined for better waves, and it's a way to replicate the same sort of feeling across different wave types. Many shapers are putting 5 fin boxes in their boards with increasing consistency, and as a result, a lot of them are making their own 5 fin sets. 5 fin sets are really like football teams. You don't put them all in at once, you just sub different guys in and out depending on how you feel. If you were to have the Merrick 5 fin set, you would be able to surf this as designed by Channel Islands, because they often designed the hulls of the surfboard with Merrick's templates in mind. But since the only 5 fin set that Futures and Merrick make are the AM2s, you may find yourself beneath the weight limit as prescribed for these fins. If that's the case, I would say try this first with the AM1 leads and the 3.75 quad trailers. In the case of number 4, you may find that you like this board a lot as a thruster in a beach break where you want a little bit more pivot and you have a little bit shorter of a ride. But you also might find that you really like this board as a quad on a mushier point break or a high tide day at your local beach break, because of the way that the increased fin area will help you drive forward and generate more speed. As far as waves, I think that the number 4 groveler could be really fun in knee to shoulder high mushy weak waves if you're really athletic and want to focus on high performance surfing, whereas the utility dimensions would be really fun in about waist to even a couple feet overhead, as long as it's not a really barreling, powerful wave. Now, Shred Nation, if you want to win a set of FCS2 fins and the boxes to go with them before most shops and shapers even have them, send us an email at sendmesomefins@gmail.com. When you send that email, answer the questions that you see below in the YouTube info for this video. When you look down at the YouTube info, also look for video of Dane Reynolds surfing this board. You've probably already seen it, but it's worth watching again. If you like the video, please click like, not the thumb, but the actual button below the YouTube video on the left. That's it for this episode. We really hope the waves are up wherever you are until we see you next time.